James Waters is currently the CTO of modern application platforms at VMware, but he has truly done it all. Whether it was working with large corporate companies or helping startups establish themselves in the private sector, James has been there. On this episode of IT Visionaries, James sits down to discuss some of the things he's learned along the way, including why he believes it's imperative for research and development teams to work side by side with clients. He also discusses what forced some of the changes we see in enterprise applications today, and how these unprecedented times will shape technology moving forward. Enjoy this episode. IT Visionaries is created by the team at mission.org and brought to you by the Salesforce Customer 360 platform, the #1 cloud platform for digital transformation of every experience. Build connected experience, empower every employee, and deliver continuous innovation with the customer at the center of everything you do. Learn more at salesforce.com/platform. This podcast is created by the team at mission.org.
Welcome to another episode of IT Visionaries. I'm Ian Faison, host of IT Visionaries. We are joined by special guest, James. What's going on?
Hey, what's going on, Ian? Hi.
Excited to have you on the show today. We're going to be talking about a bunch of the really cool stuff going on at VMware and Pivotal. Going to get into your background. So first, how did you get started in technology in the first place?
You know, like a lot of people my age, I sort of was in college during the internet boom of the late 90s. And I got an engineering role at an internet company. And, you know, the idea that all this connectivity was going to change the world. Thankful for all those internet pipes right now during what we're going through in terms of working from home. But sort of like the original .com boom pulled me into technology, started learning a lot about the different layers of the stack, what made that all work, got fascinated, and been basically 22 years of continuing to learn. So it's been really fun.
Walk me through what it means to be CTO of modern application platforms at VMware.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the first thing is it's really a team sport, and I work on a great team. So it's a little bit less around me, and it's more about just finding ways of leveraging the awesome team we have. So we have, on the team, we're lucky to be guided by Ray O'Farrell, who was the CTO of all of VMware, one of the original people that helped start the technology at VMware. Really long-term vision for VMware as a company as well as the market. And then we also have the creators of Kubernetes and Craig McCluskey and Joe Beta, and the team that kind of incorporated them into VMware led under Paul Fazzone. So I really work on this really all-star team of folks that have a lot of experience in terms of enterprise infrastructure software, as well as the latest trends in modern applications and containerization. So my role is primarily to help guide the product and technology strategy, as well as interfacing a fair amount with our clients and making sure that what we're building is solving their needs on a day-to-day basis. So I split my time maybe 70%, 30% between internal development projects and 30% with constant interface with clients. And that always just keeps me really curious, right? Because it's that end-to-end loop of technology meets outcome that I think is so fascinating. Kent Beck said once on this podcast around his experience at Facebook, there really is no technical win. You really need to find the thing that makes it work for the business. So I do try to be one of those folks that closes the loop with our customers and making sure that what we're doing really matters to them, is giving them leverage. So I think it's feel very lucky to have the role to look across both sides of that.
Yeah, that is fascinating. I didn't realize you worked with customers so much. Is that just something that, as you're, building and refining product, like what is that, something that you kind of developed? What was the impetus for that?
I joke that I kind of have two jobs. I do the normal day job, and then also, like building and being part of the R&D team. And then the customer stuff is really also a passion because you can't really solve these things in a vacuum. And so, we have clients that are some of the largest enterprises in the world running us at 100,000, plus container scale. And it really has affected their organizational models. Like they've changed the organization of their companies to better leverage our technology. It's not sort of like making a component product. It's really a somewhat transformational set of technologies that affects how these leaders organize and prioritize their business. And that's where if you're almost not participating in that discussion, you don't really see the end-to-end impact of the technology. So it's passion-driven for me. I love the technology, I love building it, but I also really, really enjoy the partnership we have with some of the most, largest organizations in the world.
And I guess for folks who don't know about Pivotal, can you share kind of the background for Pivotal as well?
Sure. A little bit of a windy road there because I started at VMware in 2009 and 2010 working on a project that eventually got spun out into a company that we labeled Pivotal. And we basically grew that technology into something that was big enough to be a public company and then ultimately reincorporated into VMware as a business unit. But I think the radical idea of Pivotal was essentially a modern application platform that also had a set of consulting services around it that would enable you to transform your organization as well to be more around continuous delivery architectures. Pivotal partnered with some of these large enterprises in the world to really take them from what I would call like the ITIL era, where they were doing everything as maybe a year-long project, deploying once a year, doing things in very kind of fine-grained swim lanes, to moving it to be more of a continuous delivery. Like the big idea of Pivotal was that we could come in and give you both the platform and the development framework as well as the consulting assistance to help you go from idea to production. And what I used to say, at least a week, sometimes a day. And the idea that you would have, user impact, user feedback on a core business application that could change every week in a secure and reliable way was a pretty radical idea 5 years ago. But it's become much more de jour today.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm curious. So what was it like when the company got acquired and then, now integrating with, VMware, which is, a Goliath in the industry for a long time and cutting edge industry leader for many years?
Yeah, I'll tell you why I'm kind of really excited about it is that we at Pivotal had part of the solution, but VMware, I look at them as the number one infrastructure software company in the world, pure play infrastructure software. And we can now approach an organization and say, like, for all of the applications that you're running, whether you just want to get efficiency benefits of a hypervisor, if you want to get the operational, declarative automation improvements of containerization, if you want to start to look at, the developer benefits of developer experiences on those container platforms, the whole way up to microservices platforms that might allow you to do continuous delivery across complex organizations, we can be that essentially essential technology provider across that whole spectrum of their application portfolio. And what happened was, in my humble opinion, is that the movement that we started was too important to just be a point product. It had to be part of this broader suite where one of my favorite things is when a client just comes out of some discussions with us and they say, I'm just doing VMware, like I'm doing the VMware solution. And it takes thousands of engineers to start to build the scale of a project where a major enterprise can turn to you and say, like, my strategy is this company. Once you see that that's the shape of the market, you start to get really passionate about working across the different divisions of VMware to really show up in that way for clients. So I've been having a lot of fun in the first 90 days of this.
Yeah, that is really fun. It is kind of one of those situations where the whole is now, greater than the sum of the parts, right? When you can kind of leverage the existing, customer base and all those things. Tell me a little bit about the types of companies that you work with.
I think, one of the things about VMware is they're one of the most ubiquitous, software offerings in the world. And, I think they've gotten a scale of, something around 500,000 clients. And so they're really everywhere. And at Pivotal, we were a little bit more focused on the Fortune 1000. And so I think part of what we've been doing is thinking about, okay, like how do we make the Fortune 1000 even more successful? But then how do we start to also, as my colleague Craig McCluskey says very well, democratize some of these technologies we've built at Pivotal for everyone to use. Even a medium-sized company can start to enable developer workflows to differentiate, so that any group of 5 or 6 developers anywhere in the world could have 2 to 10x the efficiency in terms of how they get code to production and operate it. That's a big part of our mission right now, is to democratize a lot of some of the higher end technologies we've been using.
Yeah. The way that the enterprise has been changing over the past few years, I'm curious, like what have you seen, kind of from your time, your last 7 years kind of working on this to now? Like, what are some of those things that you've seen as, huge kind of changes in the market? I mean, I know that's like a loaded question, but specifically, it seems like, within what Pivotal was building to the acquisition point, it's like the world completely changed with cloud native stuff and all of that. So
Yeah, I think maybe I'd highlight, it's my own personal perspective, is that I think there was maybe a dark era for enterprise products, especially enterprise application products, where the enterprise application space had been kind of in a war of adding features that might not always be necessary, or might be a little academic, but more and more and more features, right? So enterprise products were really distinguished by like, oh, it's got these million checkboxes and it tries to do all these magic things. But, by 08 or 09, they were so complicated and so few people could really use them with velocity that what started to happen was all of a sudden, and this is the way I tell the story, like Paul Graham started Y Combinator and gave people, gave 4 developers cloud technologies and said, go at it, right? And I think the world really realized then, as some of these startups started using cloud technologies and continuous delivery to really get to market quickly, that it wasn't just about, having a really dense set of layers of enterprise technologies with all these features. You really had to design for velocity and resiliency. And that was a huge shift from kind of like the more sales-driven architectures that some of the traditional enterprise products had. And so I watched that firsthand in a technology we had called Spring Boot, where it used to be that Java was differentiated as Java development was differentiated by having these super expensive million feature kind of environments. And suddenly Spring Boot was like, how do you just get an API to production today? Let's optimize for that experience. And the thing took off like a rocket. And like every second and a half right now, a developer starts a new project with Spring Boot. And I think that's really part of the history here, is that what we were designing to do radically shifted towards resiliency and velocity, not just sort of fancy whiz-bang tunability and features. And I don't even know what some of these features really did in the end of the day, but they seemed like a good idea at the time. But I would say 08, 09 is when enterprises kind of hit that trough and startups started to outpace them. And I think the decade following that is when enterprises realized that they needed to compete at startup speed.
Yeah, that's super fascinating. I would add and be curious to your thoughts on like self-service being something like you look at back in the day when, these implementations and these huge implementation partners, and a lot of that stuff obviously still happens in consulting firms and all that. And so startups responded by kind of saying like, well, we can't do any of that. So we're going to make it self-serve. We're going to make you be able to make a buying decision right away, get started, more or less right away with a, customer success team, kind of like do everything we can to keep you and hope you don't churn.
Yeah. And I think the change was really to what I would call like a developer first mindset for infrastructure, and not to be cheesy about it, but that like you essentially unleash human potential when you give smart people API contracts that they can just get going and go do. Developer first organizations where you can really say like every asset that we have in this company is something that a smart developer could sit down tomorrow, leverage and get to production quickly. That is the still long game that we're playing, to say like, API first designs for both infrastructure and applications that enable that kind of creativity and velocity. That's a big change from, to be fair, in the early 2000s, late 90s, like when I started in technology, the computers were barely fast enough to even run these big robust systems. Like you would have to pay $1 million for a server big enough to run a database that mattered. And I think, we went slow. My first day at Sun Microsystems in 2001, one of the projects I kind of walked through was that we would do a server sizing assessment for a client for 6 weeks. And, I just think back of where we were in technologies. It was because these things were expensive, right? You were paying $1 million for a server. It's worth thinking about how much you really need. Whereas today with, like virtualization and cloud API provisioning, you just respond on demand through an API to size the environment for the application. And a lot of what Kubernetes has done is it said, like, here's your declarative manifest. You can grab infrastructure and go. But that really wasn't where we were in terms of the economics of computing in the early 2000s. It was still very expensive just to stand things up.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's super fascinating. Wow, 6 weeks.
Yeah, just like 6 week server sizing assessment. Like, and now we have cloud. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it is one of the funny things that like happened where like lean startup, I think, what was that, 15 years ago at this point or something like that came out? No,
I'm not sure in the date, but yeah.
2011 probably. So that was like 8 years ago.
Yeah.
But you just look at between that and now and the speed in which you could deliver versus like if you were doing the same exact thing. Like that's why, back in 2001 and, the .com stuff, it's like everybody's making, like, oh, I can make a website, right? That can do, X, Y, and Z and scale. And now it's like you can make a mobile application you look at even the companies that are, like the Postmates or, Uber, Lyft or whatever, that put all of their engineering resources into just their app. And like, the amount of resources that just go into, companies that are built as a single application essentially is really wild. I mean, comparing that to like, if you had flashed back to 2001 and told yourself like, companies are going to be built just off of this one thing, it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. I mean, I think the one thing to always follow is sort of Moore's law, which is just continue to make computers faster and faster and faster, at least over the last, 40, 50 years, which is, it's just been an incredible provider. It's changed it from the point where, it's economically efficient for a small team to quickly provision and procure computing capacity that could be world changing in terms of the application that it creates. And I think that's a big part of what really changes. It used to have this barrier to entry. Like you had to, I think a friend of mine in 99, he was starting this basic e-commerce website and he needed $150,000 just to buy one server that was strong enough to run it.
Yeah.
So the barriers of entry used to be huge. So you didn't need as much velocity. So yeah, it's been a really great time.
So you have been really involved in R&D in your career. And I'm curious, like from an R&D perspective, like how do you look at, building a team of innovation and kind of working on those sort of things with all of the stuff that we just said is like the fact that you can, startups do, the way that they do quote unquote R&D is like essentially, customer development, refinement, back to that. I'm curious, like how has your approach changed for looking at R&D?
I think there's kind of two things I personally believe in there. The first is, customer centricity can and will matter at some point in a product development cycle. It doesn't mean you can go out to a customer with no ideas and no sense of direction of where you want to go and you've built nothing. Like it's not purely about customer interviews. But I think understanding the shape of the market through the customer's eyes allows you to be more efficient in terms of how you do R&D. That is a kind of a core belief that I have. So in some ways, working to cross the cultures of the customer and the engineer is just a big part of what day-to-day product people do. So I certainly have learned that that's harder than you think because those people don't by routine just talk to each other freely, right? You have to kind of bring them together. I think the other thing that I learned is that, portfolio theory and not understanding that you don't know what might work and having a couple different, irons in the fire at any one given time may help. Spring Boot at Pivotal during that time, it wasn't really like this top-down plan that we're going to go rejuvenate the Java development market through this approach. I think it started with a couple of smart engineers noticing some things and patterns in the community, and then that thing started taking off. And I think the manager's role is really to notice what's working and then pile resources on and do more of it. So I think, if the leadership can help articulate the market and the customer focus, as well as observing what's working and knowing when to double down on what's working, those are two big lessons that at least I've learned in addition to the kind of normal process hygiene I think we all go through.
Can you share some, for lack of a better term, like kind of case studies of huge customers that you have worked with recently and like what this sort of engagement looks like?
Yeah, I think our top clients basically run us at the 100,000 container scale right now of this Tanzu platform, Tanzu set of technologies that we have. One client told me, this is where, the client truth does matter to me in a casual way. So I'm having dinner with a client in Seattle.
Well, hold on. Sorry, really quick. And I'm curious too, like, so who are you talking directly to? A CTO, a CIO? Like, who are the folks that you're working like directly with on this?
Yeah, so this is in this case a CTO and a CIO, and I'm having a check-in dinner with them. This is the two jobs, product and R&D during the day, and then sometimes customer networking at night used to be my routine back when we were all traveling. And the client turns to me, kind of cutting their meal, and said, James, it used to take us 500 people to operate our core applications, and now it takes 6. And our SLAs are, essentially more than 60% improved in terms of availability, mean time to repair. Those are some of these moments where you realize that people were treating every application and every application's configuration and every application's infrastructure as a one-off, which meant that there was a linear scale between applications and operational burden. Does that make sense? Like they were basically assigning projects, and then they assign people to projects, and then operational people to projects.
Yeah.
And what happened when they went to this more, containerized, distributed Tanzu infrastructure approach is that they suddenly realized that every application could be treated in a similar set of control loops by the platform. And then, the CIO turned to me and said, I just need more and more and more into this operational model. I need to transform from my old project-based operational model to this new, kind of platform approach of infrastructure. I think that's the thing, we generalized a whole category of behaviors that used to be run project to project into a substrate that could handle all of them as, at once. So that was a big deal. The other thing that happened was that it used to take them, they might have pushed features to their customers 2 or 3 times a year on their major projects. And I think that same company told me that they were doing, 10 to 20x more frequent feature releases now, so that the business could honestly come into their office on a Monday morning and by that Friday or the following Friday, have a meaningful chunk of business value, delivered to the client. And I think it's funny how quickly then clients take that for granted, and that CIO left that discussion saying, I'm going to take a Tanzu first rule across everything we do. Because there's sort of no looking back once you see a 500 to 6, transformation in terms of operating burden and a 10x improvement in deployments. But the other thing I've learned though is they're never satisfied. So, that same CIO comes back 6 months later and said, okay, what's next? I want more, I want more, I want more. I think that's the awesome thing about the technology market is that people are never satisfied. They always want to see what's that next big hit you're going to bring me.
That's fascinating. Yeah. That's a really insightful piece.
Never celebrate for too long because they'll be back hungry soon.
Yeah, no kidding. Any stuff that you've heard from the market and your customers that really surprised you?
Here's actually maybe a different answer is I've learned like the one thing my customer interactions and travel to see customers and really learn about the market firsthand, in addition to the product and R&D job has taught me is how similar all these companies' experiences really are in these transformations or how related they are. Like you start almost having deja vu in some of the conversations because they're hitting the same friction points or they're seeing the same opportunities. And I think that's what really gives me passion about kind of our role in helping these companies, which is that not only do we give them the products, but we also give them the advice and understandings of how to make that transition to this new place. So I think the thing that has surprised me is how much in common a lot of these companies have in terms of the challenges they're facing and the potential of the solutions. And I didn't really know before I saw it firsthand how standardized a lot of that would be. There's a huge amount of variance. I don't mean to overstate it, but there really are these essential patterns to these technology markets and enterprises that all these companies are going through at once. And it's pretty inspiring to be on the vendor side because you actually can see across all of that opportunity in a way that almost no one else can because they're involved in their individual routines. But I think that's the most kind of surprising thing for me to see firsthand.
Yeah, that's a great point. Do you think that, obviously we're kind of, in the middle of this pandemic and, it's obviously like, sad and tragic. And I think people are kind of trying to figure out how to do what they need to do from an organizational perspective, better and more from a more productive standpoint. We talk a lot, on the show about employee experience and like what that means and who owns that. I'm curious, like from an employee experience standpoint, like what are you hearing from your peers, from fellow CTOs and CIOs about how they're kind of, leading through the crisis?
Yeah. And, just thoughts go out to everyone who's leading through this right now. It's an unprecedented set of circumstances. I personally have been, energized by the level of commitment I think I've seen our customers show in innovating in terms of their work from home environments and in terms of continuing to lean into technology transformation. So I was talking to a good friend of mine who is a CIO at a major company yesterday. And his comment to me was, we enabled, many thousands of folks to work from home within a couple of days, made sure that we suddenly had turned on all the capabilities to do that. We're designing everything we do to enable remote work now, as well as, their leadership had said, like, how do we use this time to even further into our technology transformation? So the thing I've seen from clients is they're saying, don't waste a good crisis in a sense, or a crisis. And let's speed up our transformation coming out of this to be even stronger. And we have the new design point of enabling remote work, enabling online and API services. So I do think we'll never kind of be the same as a society. And I do think that remote work will certainly be more acceptable and obviously more practiced. And I also think like the online experience and the API first experience is going to be even more paramount than ever before. I mean, imagine how many industries where suddenly the only way they're interfacing through their clients is purely through their connectivity.
Yeah, it's one of those funny things where, that's how we more or less always did things with, people overseas and stuff like that, whether it's phone calls and then, every now and then you're going to send sales or whoever it is to, go across the pond or, head across the world to go do maybe the one in-person kind of meeting a year or whatever it is. It really helps our engagement with, people that are much farther away. But the people that are just down the street now too, where, it saves you a little bit of time, to be able to have certain types of meetings and things like that. I'm a little nervous of like over meeting now that our in between meetings, you don't have to walk around anymore. But I do think that from a business standpoint, figuring out how to deliver a customer experience that's 100% digital is really critical.
Yeah, that's well said. And it's no longer a slow evolution to that digital first world right now, if you put it that way, right? Like it is an immediate snap to the digital first companies are going to come out of this stronger than anyone. And I think that every leader who's even in a hybrid organization that has some traditional, some what you might call digital, they're definitely making that turn. So I've seen it creating demand for a lot of technologies. Maybe the most famous, of course, what we're using right now, Zoom. But I think that there's a lot more technologies than that. So I think we're just doing our best to really be available for our clients and help them at any time of the day, navigate that.
Yeah, I mean, you hear about these, like we were talking about, before we hopped on air, hearing about these companies that are doing integrations, 50,000 employees, 10,000 employees, 200,000 employees. Like, yeah, we were talking about this the other day about how important it is, more than ever to kind of figure out that your salespeople or your, implementation teams or whoever it is are able and ready to be able to withstand the people who are going to need to make a move immediately to adopt a new technology that supports, the new normal. And it's like, some businesses obviously are struggling a ton from this, and others are like inundated with requests because they need to move to a, 100% remote workforce immediately. And that's, takes a lot of effort and time, and most companies aren't kind of built for that. Like, we always talk about scale, but like that type of scale is really tough to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, our first priority is, of course, keeping employees and customers healthy and, making sure that everyone's healthy and safe. After that, we're really saying like, how do we help you respond? whatever you're responding to. And I think, as our discussion has touched upon though, like that is thankfully been the 20-year trend that technology has been going on, is to be dynamically scalable through APIs, responsive to change. So in some ways, thankfully technology was already headed that direction. Things like Zoom and Slack were already, products before the crisis. And so in some ways, I'm glad we have some of that bedrock in technology, and we can continue to lean into that to at least help solve that problem during all of this unprecedented time.
So I want to go back a little bit into your career at the kind of moment in time when Pivotal kind of came to be as the spin out, or I don't know how you'd refer to it, but how involved were you in that, and like why did you decide that was something you wanted to do? I'm curious, what was that kind of time like to be able to do something like that? It was kind of a unique experience, and then obviously coming back into the fold is a unique one as well. So I'm just curious.
Yeah. I think just honestly, like we were a pre-revenue product at VMware. And I was having all kinds of fun like you can have on a pre-revenue product, it was about kind of like developer feedback, technology conversations. I was getting to work with these, brilliant folks, Mark Lukowski, Derek Collison, Vadim Spivak, who were all, these engineers coming from Google. And I was learning all about the future kind of from them and trying to figure out how to make this all into a successful product. But it was sort of, this halcyon kind of engineering, collaboration, fun times. And then suddenly they're like, hey, by the way, we're going to spin you out into a company and it needs to go public at some point, basically, is the business plan.
Yeah.
It got really serious really fast in terms of like, you asked like when my customer focus happened, right? It was that year.
I love that.
Because, I went from just enjoying the whiteboard sessions and the drinks after work, learning about technology, to suddenly saying like, okay, we have X number of engineers that cost us X amount a year. We need to at least, have customers giving us that amount. Like that was my very first thought, right? Like very basics. What my friend Scott Yara, who's really the creator of Pivotal, along with Paul Moritz, refers to as the lemonade stand math. Like we had to have like some talks about, okay, what's our lemonade stand math? The lemons and the sugar cost us this much. And so I ran around and did a little bit more customer facing work that summer, and we met some clients, and we ended up, selling $40 million worth of the platform in the first year. And no one really expected us to do that. But that was sort of like the moment where I realized there was magic of being a connector between the research work and the development work, as well as the client opportunity. So I think that's probably maybe the most fun story there. And that's where the client skills were learned under pressure, if you will.
I love that story because it is the ultimate like startup versus big company mindset thing of like, you turn on, you hop into the pressure cooker and you're like, this thing is we're either going to be, delicious in 18 quarters, or we're going to be cooked for more than
I'll tell you, Scott Yara tells me the story that inspired me. And he accredits to Bob Metcalf, who, was a, entrepreneur and inventor of, a little technology called Ethernet. And he told the story that, people came to his nice house or whatever he had established himself in and said, oh, did you, build this by inventing Ethernet or whatever? And he said, no, I built this by, traveling the world and convincing people to buy the product associated with it.
Yeah, great point.
That's the difference between being the academic engineer and really facing the point of consumption. So that was the really fun thing at Pivotal. Was it was at first a pressure cooker, but also a great laboratory for seeing how that game is played.
Well, and it's a great idea, and it worked out kind of great for everyone, but it's a great lesson in innovation where it's like, if you have a group of people that are working on a project that are really smart inside your company, don't let them leave and go start a startup that like will never, reap the benefits of everything inside the organization, right? It's like figure out a way to keep those people engaged, but also, keep the pressure on a little bit. I mean, I'd be curious if they didn't make that decision, what would have happened to your team in terms of like, delivery and all that sort of stuff. I mean, and, it obviously came with a rebrand, and then there's like this kind of speed to market, and you kind of have the sexiness of a new thing. And like, I'd be really curious, like, if we could run the tables in both ways, how it would have been different.
Yeah, I don't know, but I do know that my attitude was much more comfortable and gradual when I was at a big company that had tons of funding for us to continue to explore the technology, if you will. And it got very real when I realized that if we didn't do something customers wanted, we were well funded, we weren't going to go out of business tomorrow. But the sense that my friends wouldn't have good outcomes in this whole story unless we really figured out a way of connecting with customers about it and solving real problems for them. I think that's where I forged a lot of friendships I'll never forget, is just under that like real but fun pressure.
Well, but it also seems like the way that you were able to get into the enterprise and work with like huge name customers, like huge logo customers right away. Like, was part of the pitch just like, hey, yeah, we're this startup, but like we've been incubating this for a long time, and like, we obviously have this like monster backing, and so like trust us, it's going to be okay. Because that's part of the thing with as with investing into startups, is like the speed and the flexibility and all that stuff that you get is a trade-off for the fact that you're like, there is that trust factor where like, is this company A going to be around, and B, do they actually know what they're doing to be able to secure this correctly and all of that?
Yeah. And I think that was the perfect storm that we had at our back, which is why I was so committed to pushing hard, which is that we did have some built-in institutional trust from these organizations, that they at least wanted to hear our ideas, right? And they wanted to see that evolution of what this big bet was really all about. And, maybe one way of telling it is that, some of us that were more customer facing at that time, we had the unfair advantage of having just spent 3 years with some of the smartest people in the world on these problems that had seen into the future. And then we could start to diffuse that and accelerate it out in the market. We sort of benefited from our schoolyard time as well. We'd thought about the problem a lot. And I like to call that like stalking a market. Like, you don't learn everything about a market the first year you're in it. Like, the longer you've been working on a problem, the more asymmetric advantage you have in helping a CIO. So I haven't shifted a ton in my career because I feel like the problems of this, distributed application infrastructure software are so challenging. You kind of have to keep stalking it and keep learning. So it was fun to talk to people about those problems.
Last question before we get into our lightning round here. Are there any trends or technologies that you're particularly excited about right now or going forward?
Yeah, I think one problem that enterprises have is they've adopted this continuous delivery model for what you might call the more end user facing applications, but they still sometimes have a real strict segmentation between the data side of their house and the application side of their house. So we've been looking at technologies like streaming and Kafka, which start to take what used to be this Hadoop MapReduce paradigm and refactor it more towards a more real-time, event-centric, data buffering and brokering that allows both applications as well as analytics to consume it. And I think that really is a trend to follow in enterprises now, as they've made their applications more agile. But I think integration and data and how all that's working is still an unsolved problem. And I do think that is sort of what's next for these organizations. Is they've made individual teams go faster, but I still think we can do a better job of bringing them all together and sharing data across teams, making data more real time, and that's just going to make the application so much more powerful. So I think that is definitely a trend to watch, and it allows you to do things that you might never have done before in an application, right? Like, how can you do real-time inventory management across thousands and thousands of stores and know exactly what your inventory might be in real time? That's a great example of a streaming application. Makes that pretty trivial for a developer to program versus doing it in a more brute force way. So there's some pretty exciting things in event-based function as a service and streaming that I think are the next frontier for some of what we're doing.
Let's get into our lightning round. These questions are fast and easy, just like the Salesforce Customer 360 platform, the #1 cloud platform for digital transformation of every experience. You can go to salesforce.com/platform to learn more. We love Salesforce Platform, the sponsor of this show from the first second that it is aired. Check it out, salesforce.com/platform. Lightning round questions. James, are you ready?
Yeah, first thing I say is, thanks to San Francisco's own Mark Benioff for his leadership during this time. He's been a great model for San Francisco. So thank you, Mark, and thanks for being a sponsor. But as a local, I'm super appreciative of all he does.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, it really is. Private enterprise is stepping up in a major way, with speed and flexibility and agility that is pretty amazing. Like Apple just announced a huge thing today, and like it just seems like every other day the, for lack of a better term, coalition of the willing here is pretty amazing to see from technology stepping up, not just with the technology that we all use to communicate with each other, but also with actual companies putting effort, energy, and resources behind trying to solve problems.
Yeah, it's great to see.
What app on your phone is the most fun?
Boy, for me, it's got to be iMessage with my friends, and that shows you how old and boring I am. But I think I'd be lost if I couldn't emote thumbs up, thumbs down, exclamation point all day long, discussing everything that's going on in the world with some of my trusted friends. So that's probably my favorite message. iMessage on my phone, my favorite app.
Favorite podcast or book that you've listened to or read recently?
I am a junkie of Software Engineering Daily. I'm super thankful that exists. They put out tons of great content in depth on these otherwise what some might consider arcane technologies, but which I'm always excited to learn about. So Software Engineering Daily is definitely my favorite podcast. Shout out.
What is your best advice for a first-time CTO?
My best advice for a first-time CTO is that it's really, really deeply about the team dynamics and making sure that the team is supporting each other and that you're setting a culture of both intellectual passion and curiosity and technical understanding, but also making sure that you're not talking past each other and you're supporting each other's goals and rallying around a shared vision. So shared values, high trust, shared vision is the magic on top of the technical understanding, I think.
Hidden talent or passion?
I like to write tweets, and sometimes people say I put words together in an interesting way I didn't expect. So I guess I like writing tweet level things.
Some people, some way. I love it. What do you do for fun?
Actually my fun, and this will sound super nerdy, I love taking a walk around San Francisco. It's so beautiful along the Embarcadero or up in the hills and just listen to Software Engineering Daily. That's when I feel really lucky just to be part of everything that's going on in innovation in the Valley and living it firsthand while also walking out in nature. And those two things together make me pretty happy. By
the way, I should say Waters James is the Twitter handle, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Last name, first name.
Check it out, everyone. It's got some good stuff. Final question. What question do you never get asked that you wish you were asked more often?
What question do I never get asked? Maybe like, what's going to be hard about this? So my favorite moments with clients is when there's such a high trust of communication is when I can tell them, here's where to focus and here's where you may face challenges, and know that any hint of caution from me isn't going to result in them stopping everything they're doing. It's just going to further our trust. So I think, great partners come to each other and they say, look, here's what's going to be hard. Here's what should work. And just really sharing that learning as opposed to just spinning or just discussing the benefits only side of the equation.
Awesome. That's it. That's all we got.
Awesome, man.
Any final thoughts? Any things to plug?
Just the project we're working on, the brand is called Tanzu. So check out everything Tanzu at VMware.
Awesome. Thanks again, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks so much. Stay safe.
IT Visionaries is created by the team at mission.org and brought to you by the Salesforce Customer 360 platform, the #1 cloud platform for digital transformation of every experience. Build connected experience, empower every employee, and deliver continuous innovation with the customer at the center of everything you do. Learn more at salesforce.com/platform.